The Christianity that history didn't tell exists a veil covering the truth, a fabric of threads embroidered with interpretations, dogmas, and convenient silences. The history of Christianity, as it has been narrated, is merely a reflection of its deepest reality, a distorted echo of a teaching that, in its origin, was not limited to blind faith or ecclesiastical structure. The essential key has been hidden, that Christ is not an exclusive figure in history, but a latent power in every human being, waiting to be awakened. The teachings Jesus left behind were not lessons to be repeated without reflection, but alchemical formulas for transforming consciousness. However, over time, the institution formed in his name transformed his message into doctrine and his parables into fixed laws, forgetting that truth cannot be captured in a single book or reduced to a single dogma. In the early centuries, when a Bible as we know it did not yet exist, disciples learned in secret, receiving direct instruction on the nature of the soul, the transmutation of being, and the connection with the divinity within. But these teachings were silenced, their texts hidden, and the bearers of their knowledge persecuted as heretics. The Gospel of Thomas, found in the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, contains words from Jesus that are not included in the official accounts. There, his message is stripped of intermediaries. If you bring forth what is within you, it will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, it will destroy you. This is not the voice of an external savior demanding obedience, but of a teacher pointing the way to self-salvation. What does this mean? That divinity is not outside, nor does it wait in a distant heaven. It is not a figure with a human face dictating commandments from a throne. It is the spark hidden in the depths of being, the I Am, that when recognized, awakens and transforms reality. Jesus taught clearly, the kingdom of God is within you. He did not present it as a future promise, but as a truth that could be experienced here and now. True Christianity is a science of consciousness, a path that fuses mysticism and mental power. In his parables, Jesus did not speak only of morality, but of the ability to alter reality through word and intention. When he stated, "Whatever you ask in prayer, believing you will receive," he was not establishing an arbitrary condition, but explaining the workings of a universal law. The mind, when focused with conviction on an internal image, generates a vibrational field that attracts the manifestation of that image in the external world. This is not superstition. It is the foundation of Christian metaphysics, knowledge that many churches have forgotten or preferred to ignore. Medieval mystics still retained fragments of this truth. In the 13th century, Meister Eckhart wrote of the need to empty oneself to allow the Christ to be born in the soul. God cannot fill us until we have emptied ourselves. This teaching resonates with Jesus' words, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself." But denial here does not mean suffering or repression, but rather the abandonment of the illusion of the separate self, the dissolution of ego structures to allow the expansion of true essence. In the early days of Christianity, there were communities that understood this knowledge. The Essenes, who practiced meditation and purification of body and mind, prepared their disciples for the experience of the divine within themselves. Among them, baptism was not a simple water ritual, but a symbol of inner rebirth, a preparation for the opening of consciousness. But these truths were displaced by a theology that emphasized submission and sin, a structure that reinforced dependence on external salvation rather than internal fulfillment. Jesus was made into a unique and unattainable figure, when in fact his message was that every human being could do the same as he did. "Whoever believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also, and greater works than these will he do." Few phrases have been more ignored, and few contain such a powerful truth. Original Christianity was not a doctrine for slaves of guilt, but a manual of enlightenment. It did not teach us to wait for the arrival of a heavenly kingdom after death, but to manifest it in the present. It did not place barriers between God and human beings, but rather revealed their essential unity. But to access this truth, one must break with inherited conditioning and open one's mind to the possibility that Christ's message was, and continues to be, a call to personal transformation and the awakening of a dormant power. It is not a matter of blindly believing these words, but of experiencing them, because true faith is not an intellectual assent, but the certainty that springs from experience. And he who awakens to this reality is no longer a servant, but a creator, a being who understands that divinity is not something achieved, but something that, deep down, one has never ceased to be. Christian Metaphysics that few churches know about. Written and published. Listen to your subconscious. All rights reserved. We've noticed that over 90% of those who visit our channel are not subscribed. You can support this project by clicking the subscribe button and liking the video. Thank you for inspiring us to continue creating more and better content for you. Are you ready to transform your life? Chapter 1. The Inner Christ, Beyond the Historical Jesus. Time has woven a vast network of stories, doctrines, and symbols around the image of Jesus. For some, he is the long-awaited Messiah. For others, an enlightened master who walked among humanity, leaving a legacy of love and redemption. However, beyond the historical Jesus, there is a deeper mystery. Christ as a living force within the human being, a divine spark that belongs not to a single era or a single people, but beats at the center of all existence. Since ancient times, sages have spoken of this immanent presence, of a latent power in each individual that, when awakened, transforms reality. In pharaonic Egypt, they spoke of the Ba, the divine principle that descended into the soul as a reflection of the god Ra. In Vedic tradition, it is known as Atman, the higher self that is identical with Brahman, the supreme consciousness. In the canonical Gospels, this teaching is encoded in the words of Jesus: "The kingdom of God is within you." This is not a poetic metaphor, but a veiled revelation, an invitation to look beyond form and recognize Christ as a cosmic principle present in every being. Christian mystics understood this mystery. In the writings of Meister Eckhart, we find the affirmation that Christ must be born in the soul, as he was in Bethlehem. It is not enough to venerate him as an event of the past. His birth is an internal event, a transfiguration that occurs when the ego dissolves and makes room for light. The Gospel of Philip, a Gnostic text excluded from the official Bible, says it even more boldly: "Do not call Jesus Christ, but the Christ who dwelt in him." This message resonates in the esoteric tradition, which teaches that the Christ state is a level of consciousness accessible to all, a vibrational frequency that transforms human beings into channels of the divine. An ancient Indian tale tells of a boy born with the ability to remember all his past lives. As he grew, his wisdom baffled the elders, for he spoke with the certainty of one who has seen the eternal flow of existence. One day, while gazing at his reflection in a lake, he realized that it was not just his body or mind, but something vaster, something untouched by time. His teacher looked at him and said, "You have seen the Christ within you, but you must still embody it." This is the real challenge. It is not enough to intellectually recognize the divinity within. One must embody it, live from it, manifest it in every act. The inner Christ is not an idea, but an experience, a state of being that transforms every thought and every action. Those who awaken it no longer act from fear, lack, or selfish desire, but from the certainty that everything is interconnected, that love is the only real force. Throughout history, many have reached this state, even if their names are not spoken from pulpits. Rumi, The great Sufi mystic spoke of the call as that divine presence that dwells deep within the heart. St. John of the Cross described union with God as a dark night in which the ego dissolves so that the light may shine more brightly. St. Teresa of Avila, in her visions, understood that the soul has mansions, and that in the deepest of them burns the living flame of the inner Christ. But the modern world has forgotten this truth. Jesus' message has been reduced to a set of external beliefs, when in reality, it was a map for the transmutation of consciousness. His true teaching was not just to love one's neighbor, but to remember who we really are, to transcend the illusion of separation, and to manifest the creative power that lies dormant within. It is not an easy path. The awakening of the Christ within is a process of death and resurrection, of abandoning what one thinks oneself to be in order to discover what one truly is. The cross in this sense is not just a symbol of suffering, but of transfiguration. It represents the intersection between matter and spirit, the instant in which human beings open to the divine and become more than they ever imagined. In a cave lost in the desert, a monk wrote centuries ago a phrase that still resonates strongly. Christ is not in the temple, nor on the cross, nor in the sacred books. He is within you, but you will only find him when the noise of your mind quiets and the flame in your chest burns without fear. And then, when the silence deepens, you will hear his voice. Chapter 2. The Law of Manifestation in the Words of Jesus. The Word is the first light that pierces the veil of emptiness. At the beginning of the world, the Scriptures tell us, creation was unleashed with a single command. Let there be light, and there was light. It was not born from matter or chance, but from pure intention, from the unbreakable decree that commands the universe to manifest itself. In the words of Jesus, this same truth resonates powerfully. Whatever you ask for in prayer, believing, you will receive. The phrase is simple, but it contains a mystery that few have been able to decipher. It doesn't say, perhaps. It doesn't say, if God permits. It is an absolute affirmation, a key that opens the doors to the invisible world. Whoever understands its meaning discovers that reality is not fixed, but malleable, that thoughts and words are not mere expressions of being, but tools of creation. The ancients already knew this. In Egypt, the priests of Amun whispered secret prayers that were considered formulas of life. In India, Sanskrit mantras were vibrations capable of altering the structure of the cosmos. The Hebrews, for their part, considered the name of God so powerful that only initiates could pronounce it in its true form. Jesus spoke in no different terms. His miracles were not merely acts of compassion, but demonstrations of the power of the Word, of conscious mastery over the substance of reality. A lesser-known story from the Essene tradition tells the story of a man who lived in Jesus' time. That man was a beggar, blind from birth, whose life was lived in shadows and dust. He spent his days at the temple gates, repeating the same plea to passers-by, I have nothing, I am nothing, have mercy on me. His lament cemented the reality that oppressed him. His words were not a description of his life, but the building blocks of it. Jesus understood this principle. When he approached the sick, he didn't ask about their ailments, but rather said, get up and walk. Be clean. Your faith has saved you. He never left room for doubt, never allowed for the possibility of failure. His words were not pleas or uncertain requests, but unwavering decrees. His voice echoed with absolute certainty that what is declared with conviction must become reality. The law of manifestation does not operate from empty desire, but from absolute conviction. The human mind, when it is aware of its power, acts as a reflection of the divine mind. As above, so below. This is why Jesus insisted on faith, not as a mere feeling, but as the fuel that gives life to the Word. If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it would move. Here's the key. He doesn't say, ask God to move it. He doesn't say, wait for the mountain to decide to move. He says, you will say. It's the verb that triggers creation, the clear command, without a doubt. The Gnostic Gospels take this teaching even further. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, he who seeks must not cease seeking until he finds. When he finds, he will be troubled. When he has been troubled, he will marvel, and he will reign over all. Here we are given the progression of awakening. First the seeking, then the disturbance, because finding the truth often shakes the foundations of the world. And finally, the marvel, when the power of the word and the intention become evident. In the writings of the ancient Kabbalists, there is a principle that resonates with this teaching. The universe is a mirror that reflects back what you project into it. Nothing comes without reason. Nothing is imposed from outside. What a human being holds in his mind and utters with his lips is what becomes his world. Jesus knew this, which is why he didn't teach resignation, but rather affirmation. That's why he never asked his disciples to bow down in the face of adversity, but rather to transform their reality with the power of their faith and their word. Because the word is the first light, because every word spoken with certainty is an echo of that voice that, in the beginning, commanded light to come. Perhaps, after all, creation never ended. Perhaps, let there be light continues to resonate in the universe. Perhaps, every time a human being declares their truth with certainty, they are participating in that same primordial work. And if that's true, then what words will you choose to create your world? Chapter 3. The Power of I Am and the Secret of God's Name. The universe was woven with words. Since time immemorial, civilizations have understood that sound not only communicates, but engenders. What is spoken with certainty becomes existence. The ancient gods did not name things on a whim. By naming them, they brought them into being. In the Hebrew tradition, the act of naming is a gesture of power, a bond that unites creation with its essence. But there is one name that is not a mere sound, but a key, a vibration that, when spoken with knowledge, unlocks the foundations of reality. I am is not just a statement. It is the revelation of the divine core that sustains all that is. In the book of Exodus, when Moses asks the one who sent him, the answer he receives is not a title or a common name, but an enigma. Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, which translates as I am who I am. Not an external, distant God, but an affirmation of pure existence, without condition or limit. The ancient mystical schools understood that this name is more than a designation. It is the key to creation. In Kabbalah, the Tetragrammaton, the unpronounceable name of God, is said to be not a set of dead letters, but a hidden vibration in the very structure of reality. In the Hermetic tradition, it is taught that the universe is mental, and that consciousness is the only true power of manifestation. Jesus, knowing this secret, used the I am with an authority few have understood. I am the light of the world. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. He was not speaking of himself as a human being, but of the divine essence expressed through him. He did not say God is, or He is, but I am, because he knew that this is the only affirmation that unites human beings with divinity. Every time we pronounce I am, we are decreeing the nature of our existence. But this knowledge has not always been accessible. It is said that in Egyptian temples, initiates spent years in silence before uttering certain sacred words. They knew that the word is a force that shapes the world, and that what is declared becomes truth. In the Gnostic Gospels, Jesus says, "If you say the mountain will move, it will move." Not because there is magic in the word itself, but because whoever understands the I am does not speak from the illusion of separation, but from the very source of creation. An ancient Sufi tale tells of a man who searched for enlightenment his entire life. He traveled through deserts, fasted in mountains, meditated in monasteries, but the truth always seemed elusive. One day, he met an old man who told him, "Everything you seek is already within you, yet you keep calling yourself by names that do not belong to you." The man didn't understand, so the old man asked him a question. "Tell me, who are you?" The seeker began to answer with his name, his lineage, his history, but the old man interrupted him. "No. Tell me who you are without telling me your past, without describing your body, without speaking of what you do." The man fell silent, and in that instant, he understood. The power of I Am is not in the ego or the personality, but in the essence. The moment it is spoken without additions, without conditioning, the veil of illusion is broken, and the truth is accessed. Therefore, when Jesus said I am, he was not speaking from his earthly identity, but from the eternal consciousness that dwells within every being. In the most ancient traditions, it is taught that whoever remembers their true name regains their power. But this name is not a secret word or a divine title bestowed by others. It is the pure consciousness of being. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, "When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are children of the living Father." The real secret is not that God is, but that you are. Divinity is not found in a distant temple, but in the certainty of your own existence. And if I am is the key to creation, then every time you speak these words, you are shaping your reality. What you say after them will become your truth. You will say, "I am weak," or "I am powerful." You will say, "I am insufficient," or "I am infinite." In the beginning, the Word created the world, and in this moment, it continues to create it. What are you saying? Chapter 4. The Miracles of Jesus as Methods of Spiritual Transmutation. The true miracle is not the alteration of matter, but the transformation of consciousness. In Jesus' accounts, the miracles were not mere supernatural acts to amaze the crowd. Each one contained a deeper teaching, a key to the transmutation of being. They were symbolic manifestations that revealed the hidden power within man, a reminder that divinity is not something alien, but a living presence within every being. In the esoteric tradition, transmutation has always been central to the spiritual path. Alchemists spoke of turning lead into gold, but those who understood the mysteries knew that the process was internal, the transmutation of the ordinary self into the divine self. Jesus operated under the same law. His miracles were evidence that external reality could be shaped by intention, but only when true internal transformation was achieved. One of the most symbolic miracles was the conversion of water into wine at the wedding at Cana. On the surface, it is an act of generosity, but at its root, it is the transmutation of the common into the sacred, of matter into spirit. In Hermetic texts, water has always represented the primordial substance, formless matter, while wine symbolizes the divine essence, the elevation of substance to its highest potential. With this act, Jesus demonstrated the capacity of every human being to refine their nature, to elevate the ordinary to the sublime. The ancient mystics understood that every miracle recounted in the Gospels was, in reality, a metaphor for an internal process. When Jesus walked on the water, he wasn't challenging physics. He was demonstrating the Spirit's mastery over the instability of the human mind. The waters represent the subconscious, the fluctuating emotions, fears, and desires that drag the individual from one place to another. He who learns to walk on water is one who has conquered his inner world, who is not swept away by the currents of the ego or the shadows of fear. Peter tried to follow him, but when he hesitated, he sank. Here lies a fundamental principle. Only he who maintains his unshakable faith in his own divinity, can remain on the water without being devoured by it. Another miracle with a hidden meaning is the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. On the surface, it is an act of provision, but its teaching goes beyond physical nourishment. In esoteric symbolism, the bread represents spiritual knowledge, and the fish, divine intuition. Jesus did not distribute material food, but rather expanded the consciousness of those who followed him, multiplying understanding in those who were ready to receive it. In the early centuries of Christianity, initiates understood this mystery, and thus the fish was one of the first symbols of secret Christians. It was not only a sign of identification, but an allusion to hidden food, to knowledge that was not for everyone, but for those who had eyes to see. And then there is the resurrection of Lazarus. Of all the miracles, this is the one that best represents the process of spiritual transmutation. Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. His body already smelled. His essence had sunk into the depths of oblivion. Jesus not only called him by name, but commanded, "Lazarus, come forth." He didn't ask God to resurrect him. He didn't beg for a divine favor. He decreed life with the absolute certainty of one who knows that death is only an illusion. This miracle encapsulates the teaching that every human being can awaken from their own inner death, that no matter how deeply they have fallen into unconsciousness, there is always the possibility of rebirth. The ancient alchemists spoke of solve et coagula, the dissolution of the false self and the reconstitution of the divine self. Jesus' miracles were not displays of power, but signs of this same process. Each one of them represented a step in the transformation of the human being, from water to wine to resurrection. In a monastery lost in the mountains, a monk once wrote on a scroll, "The miracle isn't changing the world, it's changing one's gaze. He who sees with pure eyes finds gold where others see mud, finds immortality where others see death." And perhaps, after all, this has always been the greatest miracle of all. Chapter 5. Mary Magdalene and the Hidden Lineage of Knowledge. There was a time when the fire of wisdom did not burn in temples, but in the hearts of those who knew how to listen. It was not the Pharisees or the doctors of the law who guarded the flame of sacred knowledge, but those whom the world had forgotten or condemned to silence. Among them, there was a woman who not only understood the mystery of Christ, but also embodied it in its highest expression. Her name was Mary Magdalene, but history has veiled her with shadows. In the canonical Gospels, her presence is fleeting. She is mentioned among Jesus' followers. It is said that she was with him at the crucifixion, and that she was the first to see him resurrected. But the texts that the Church discarded, those apocryphal Gospels that survived through the darkness of the centuries, reveal a different story. In the Gospel of Mary, Magdalene is shown not as just another disciple, but as the one who understood what the others could not. When the apostles doubted and feared, she was the one who spoke with certainty, the one who had received from Jesus teachings that the others had not heard. Peter, jealous, says to her, "Sister, we know that the Savior loved you more than other women. Tell us the words you remember that we do not know." What was it that Mary knew had been revealed to her that the others could not bear? Since time immemorial, seekers have understood that divinity is not found on the outside, but within the depths of being. Jesus said it clearly, "When you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen." This teaching refers not only to a physical place, but to an inner retreat, a return to the sanctuary where the voice of the Spirit has never ceased to speak. The Essenes meditated at dawn, facing the rising sun, for they knew that external light is only a reflection of the internal light. The desert monks sought incessant prayer, a state where each breath became a dialogue with God. The Sufi mystics twirled in trance, losing themselves in the dance of existence until they disappeared into the divine presence. But what is prayer and what is meditation? The sentence, the vibration of the verb. Prayer is not a plea, but an affirmation. It is not an act of lack, but of communion. When Jesus taught us to pray, he didn't say, "Lord, give us what we lack," but rather, "Thy will be done." For he knew that divine will is perfect harmony, the flow of the universe at its highest expression. The ancient masters knew the power of the spoken word. In the Hebrew tradition, the name of God was unpronounceable because it was not a name, but a vibration. In Hinduism, the sound Om is the primordial echo, the energy that sustains all things. In the Gnostic Gospels, Jesus says, "Ask without fear, and it will be given to you. Speak with certainty, and it will be revealed." Prayer is not repeating mechanical phrases. It is decreeing with conviction, speaking from the Spirit, knowing that the Word is the tool with which man shapes reality. A Sufi master once said, "The best prayer is not the one spoken with the lips, but the one that becomes every beat of the heart." Meditation, merging with the source. If prayer is speaking to God, meditation is listening to his answer, not in words, but in the vibration that lies behind everything. Early Christians practiced hesychia, the search for inner silence. In India, the rishis sat in deep contemplation, stripping their minds of all distractions until they became one with existence. In Taoist tradition, it is said that whoever learns to empty themselves becomes a reflection of the universe itself. Jesus didn't just pray, he also went into the desert, removed himself from the crowd, and spent entire nights in communion with the invisible. Because connection with the source is not an event, but a state. In the monasteries of Tibet, it is said that there is a mountain where the wind does not blow. There, in the deepest silence, monks have heard what words cannot express. The union of the two, the open door. Prayer and meditation are not opposites, but complementary. One is the impulse that elevates, the other is the space that receives. When the two unite, the bridge between the human and the divine is created. The ancients knew that the secret lies in breathing. To inhale is to receive. To exhale is to offer. With each breath, consciousness enters and exits the mystery, remembering, if only for an instant, its true nature. An old scroll found on Mount Athos bore an enigmatic inscription: "Pray as if you had already received. Meditate as if you had never asked. Then the door will open itself." Perhaps the search was never outward. Perhaps the source was never far away. And the only question that remains is, who is willing to enter? Chapter 14. The Awakening of Christ in the New World. The rising sun casts its light upon a different horizon. The world we once knew is changing, and with it, the consciousness of those who inhabit it. Old structures, unshakable dogmas, and imposed truths are beginning to crumble. Something new is emerging, not from without, but from the depths of the collective soul. The Christ is awakening, not as a distant figure returning from the heavens, but as a living spark within every human being. It is not the return of one man, but the manifestation of a consciousness that has always been present, awaiting the moment when the veils of illusion would fall away. The seven seals, the seven trumpets, the beasts, the dragon, and the woman, clothed with the sun, are symbols of internal and cosmic forces, reflections of the battle each soul fights on its path to ascension. The ancients knew that enlightenment is not a peaceful event. It is an internal storm that destroys all that is not real. One does not reach the light without passing through the deepest night. In alchemy, this process is called nigredo, the dissolution of false identity, the descent into chaos before transmutation. In Revelation, this process is represented by the plagues, the horsemen, and the fall of Babylon. Babylon, in this context, is not an external city, but a symbol of the ego, of the mind dominated by desire, illusion, and attachment to matter. Its destruction is the first step toward true liberation. A Sufi tale tells of a disciple who approached his master and said, "I want to awaken. I want to attain the truth." The master looked at him and smiled compassionately. "Are you willing to let everything you believe crumble?" The disciple hesitated. "If the truth is beautiful, I will accept it." The master shook his head. "The truth is not what you expect. The truth is a fire. First it will burn you, reduce everything you are to ashes. Only then, from the ruins, will you see what has always been there." The apocalypse is that fire, the purifying fire that leaves no stone unturned in the temple of illusion. It is the war between the old self and the new self. When the four horsemen ride, they are not divine punishments, but manifestations of karma, the forces that destroy everything that prevents awakening. The dragon that pursues the woman, clothed in the sun, is the same adversary every seeker faces when they approach the light. It is the final test before redemption. But the woman is not defeated. She is taken to a place of safety, protected by heavenly power. This represents the promise that, although the process of transformation is painful, those who undergo it with faith and perseverance will be elevated to a higher state. And then comes the vision of the New Jerusalem, the city of gold and crystal, where there is no night nor need for the sun, because the light of God illuminates all things. This is not a literal city, but the final state of the enlightened soul, the return to the origin, the reintegration with the source. The Gnostics taught that creation is a cycle of fall and ascension. The soul descends into matter, forgets its divinity, but one day awakens and begins the return journey. This journey is not easy. It is full of trials, storms, and shadows that try to derail the traveler. But those who persist, those who do not allow themselves to be overcome by fear, reach the end of the path and see the light that has always been waiting for them. In an ancient text, hidden among desert papyri, lies a phrase that sums up the true meaning of the apocalypse. "Do not fear the end, for it is not an end. It is the dawning of what you have always been." Perhaps we are not waiting for the apocalypse. Perhaps we are already in it. And the only question that matters is, are we ready to wake up? Chapter 7. Satan, the Ego, and the True Meaning of the Fall. The enemy is not a horned being with a trident, but the inner voice that whispers doubt and fear deep within the soul. Satan is not a separate entity lurking in the shadows, but a reflection of the ego when it has forgotten its origin. The fall was not that of a rebellious angel in the heavens, but of the human being within. Since ancient times, religions have depicted the struggle between light and darkness, order and chaos. But few understand that this battle does not take place on an external plane, but in the heart of each individual. In Christian mythology, Lucifer is the bearer of light, who, in his pride, is cast into the depths. In Sufi tradition, Iblis is the angel who refuses to bow before Adam, and is therefore condemned to exile. In Gnostic texts, the demiurge is the creator of the material world, a minor deity who believes himself supreme and imprisons souls in the prison of illusion. All these stories point to the same thing. The fall is the forgetting of one's true identity, the disconnection of the soul from its divine origin. The ego, in its essence, is not evil. It is the structure that allows us to operate in the world, the vehicle through which consciousness experiences duality. But when the ego forgets its transitory nature and believes itself to be the sole center of existence, it becomes the adversary, the obstacle that prevents awakening. The word Satan comes from the Hebrew ha-Satan, which means the adversary. It is not a demonic being, but any force that opposes spiritual growth. Jesus understood this principle when he was led into the wilderness for 40 days. There, he faced temptation, not from an external demon, but from his own mind. "If you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread," the voice whispered. It was doubt, the desire to use his power for selfish ends. "Throw yourself from the temple, and the angels will bear you up." It was the craving for validation, the desire to be recognized as something more than a man. "If I bow down, all these things will be yours." It was the thirst for dominion, the trap of corrupting power. Jesus did not combat Satan with violence, but with knowledge. He did not deny his existence, but neither did he grant him power. He simply saw the illusion and did not fall for it. A hidden story in the Nag Hammadi manuscripts tells that the soul, before incarnating, passes through 7 gates. At each gate, it is granted a veil, the veil of identity, the veil of desire, the veil of fear, the veil of separation. Upon arriving in the world, the soul has forgotten its origin and believes itself to be an isolated being, surrounded by enemies. This is the true meaning of the fall. It is not the condemnation of an angel, but the descent of consciousness into matter, the illusion that we are bodies rather than light. But if the fall is forgetting, redemption is remembering. It's not about fighting Satan, but about recognizing him as the shadow created by the mind. It's not about denying the ego, but about illuminating it, integrating it as a servant rather than a master. In the Hermetic tradition, the devil is said to be God seen through the eyes of fear. There are no two separate forces, just one energy that manifests in different ways, depending on the state of consciousness. At the lowest level, that energy is the unbridled ego, the resistance to change, the identification with matter. At its highest level, it is the creative force, the pure will that shapes the universe. An ancient Kabbalistic manuscript contains a warning. Whoever fears the adversary gives him power. Whoever ignores him falls into his trap. Only those who recognize and transcend him become free. Perhaps Satan was never at war with God. Perhaps he was always just a mirror. And in that mirror, what do you see? Chapter 8. The number 6, 166, and the prison of matter. The number 666 is engraved in the collective mind as a dark omen, a feared code that, since ancient times, has been associated with the beast, evil, and damnation. 666 is the sign of the Antichrist, some say. It is the mark of the end, others assert. But, like so many other truths hidden behind the veil of fear, its true meaning has been lost in the shadows. In the Apocalypse of John, the number appears shrouded in mystery. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. The text doesn't say it's the number of the devil or an external demon. It says it's the number of man, not a cosmic enemy, but the human condition trapped within the limits of matter, chained to a world of ephemeral forms, of birth and death, of desire and suffering. Ancient esoteric traditions have always spoken of the 666 as a symbol of the dense world, the reflection of an imperfect structure. In Hebrew numerology, the number 6 represents incompleteness, transience, the intermediate state between creation and full divinity. Repeated 3 times, it emphasizes the trap of the material plane, the imprisonment of the soul within a body that wears out in a world ruled by the illusion of separation. The alchemists knew this secret. In their texts, they described matter in its crudest state as the unrefined beast, the primal substance that must be transmuted. 666 is matter without spirit, body without soul, form without light. An ancient Gnostic tale tells that, at the beginning of time, man was not made of flesh, but of fire. He was weightless, not subject to pain or fear. But one day, the architects of the material world encased his spark in bodies of clay and made them forget their origin. "You will be kings in this world," they were told, "but you will never return home." And so the prison of flesh, the prison of time, was born. 666 became the seal of that exile. In Kabbalah, the material world is represented by the sphere of Malkuth, the last rung of the tree of life. It is said to be the lowest realm, where consciousness is most dormant, where the soul forgets its eternity and sinks into the struggle for survival. There, man is nothing more than a number, a cog in the machine of the world, disconnected from his source. But the number 666 is not a curse. It is a challenge, a reminder that matter is not a punishment, but a stepping stone on the path back. The beast is not an external being, but the unlit ego. It is not the enemy, but the part of us that has not yet awakened. When the ancient sages spoke of the perfect man, of the transcended man, they represented him with the number 777. The 777 is the consciousness that has conquered matter, that has transmuted its dense nature into light. Whoever leaves 666 behind does not flee the world, but transforms it, elevates it, spiritualizes it. He will be only an echo, a shadow of what he once believed himself to be. Perhaps the question was never, who is the beast? But, how do we escape from his prison? Chapter 9. Baptism, Crucifixion, and Resurrection. Symbols of Enlightenment. Since time immemorial, initiation rites have marked the transformation of the soul. It is not enough to be born to live, nor is it enough to exist to awaken. Every mystical path requires a descent, a symbolic death, and a rebirth. In the Christian tradition, 3 moments define this journey: baptism, crucifixion, and resurrection. These are not simple ceremonies or isolated historical events, but keys to understanding the alchemy of the spirit. They reflect the process each seeker must undergo to transcend their own shadow and reach the light. Baptism, water, and the purification of being. In the waters of the Jordan, John the Baptist immersed those seeking a new life. But baptism was not an act of physical cleansing, but a symbol of the dissolution of the old self. In all spiritual traditions, water represents transformation, the flow of consciousness, the memory of the universe, the matrix from which everything emerges. The Essenes practiced rituals of immersion in rivers, convinced that water not only washed the body, but also reconfigured the energy of the soul. In the Eleusinian mysteries, initiates bathed in the sea before receiving sacred teachings. In Hinduism, the Ganges is seen as the gateway between the human and the divine. When Jesus immersed himself in the Jordan, something more than water covered his skin. It was the instant when the divine spark fully manifested within him, the moment when the voice from heaven proclaimed, "This is my beloved Son." Not because he wasn't before, but because in that instant he remembered it. In esoteric terms, baptism is the act of shedding the shackles of the lower mind. It is the first death, that of the ego that clings to its earthly identity. Whoever enters the water must be willing to leave behind what they believe themselves to be, in order to return with a new vision. The crucifixion, the sacrifice of the ego. The world knows the cross, but doesn't understand its meaning. Crucifixion is not only suffering, but the supreme transmutation. It is the moment when the human being is stripped of all illusion, suspended between heaven and earth, arms open in a sign of total surrender. In ancient Egyptian tradition, Osiris was dismembered and scattered throughout the world before being reborn in his true glory. In Norse mythology, Odin hung from the world tree for 9 days to receive the wisdom of the runes. The pattern is always the same. The seeker must die before being reborn. Jesus, in his crucifixion, represents the initiate who leaves behind his earthly identity to merge with the eternal. On the cross, his last teaching was not a cry of defeat, but the final revelation. "Father, Into your hands I commend my spirit. The hands, symbol of creative power, open. The mind ceases to resist. The spirit, free at last, transcends. Here lies the true sacrifice, not of the flesh, but of the self that believes itself separate from divinity. Whoever is able to cross this threshold ceases to be a human being and becomes a living light. The resurrection, the rebirth of the spirit. After the darkness, the stone from the tomb moves. Death is not the end, but the necessary step toward a new existence. But resurrection is not returning to life as before. It is awakening in a new state, in a reality where fear no longer holds sway. In the Gospels, when Mary Magdalene sees the resurrected Jesus, she doesn't immediately recognize him. His form has changed. His vibration is no longer the same. This is not a physical resurrection in the common sense, but the manifestation of a being who has transcended matter. In Kabbalah, it is said that whoever achieves enlightenment is no longer subject to the laws of the underworld. In the stories of Sufi masters, we hear of those who die before they die, and who, in doing so, become mirrors of the divine. Jesus did not return from the grave to prove his power, but to demonstrate that death is merely an illusion. In Gnostic texts, resurrection is not seen as an isolated miracle, but as the destiny of all who remember who they truly are. The path of the initiate. Baptism, crucifixion, and resurrection are not external events, but inner doors. Each of us, at some point in our lives, must immerse ourselves in the waters of change, bear the cross of detachment, and ultimately rise again as a purer version of ourselves. An ancient scroll, found in a forgotten monastery, contained an inscription: "Death is not the end, but the bridge. He who crosses without fear awakens. He who awakens never sleeps again." Perhaps the question was never, will we rise again? But, are we ready to die before we die? Chapter 10. Forgiveness and Karmic Release. There are invisible chains that bind the soul, much more than any earthly prison. They are subtle threads that keep us trapped in the cycle of suffering, dragging us again and again to the same pains, the same faces, the same destinies. These chains are not made of iron, but of unhealed memories, of emotions that refuse to be released at the time. The world calls this resentment, bitterness, guilt. But in the most ancient spiritual traditions, it is known as karma, the echo of what has not been understood, the repetition of a lesson not yet learned. Hindus explain it as the law of cause and effect, the justice that needs no judges because every action carries its own destiny. Buddhists see it as the mirror of the soul, reflecting in each life what was left undone in the previous one. And Jesus, in his deepest teaching, spoke of forgiveness not as a moral act, but as the only path to true freedom. Forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. A hidden principle lurks in this simple phrase from the Lord's Prayer. It doesn't say, "Free us from guilt without conditions," or "Take away our pain without our doing anything." It says that the forgiveness received is proportional to the forgiveness given, because the universe is a reflection, and what we don't let go becomes the shackles of our own destiny. The wound that repeats itself. An ancient Sufi story tells of a man who wandered from life to life, seeking justice. In each existence, he encountered his executioner in a different form. In one life, it was his enemy in war. In another, it was the lover who betrayed him. In yet another, the brother who robbed him of everything. Each time he died, he returned to the world with the same thirst for revenge, only to discover that history was repeating itself with another face, in another setting. Finally, in one of his lives, when he finally had his enemy at his mercy, he raised his sword and let it fall. Something in his soul understood that the struggle was endless, that true triumph lay not in revenge, but in breaking the cycle. In that instant, He felt a weight lift from his chest, and when he closed his eyes, he knew he would never encounter that enemy again. Because karma is not punishment, but repetition. It is not a debt imposed from outside, but a reflection of what the conscience continues to hold. And forgiveness is the key that unlocks the door to the exit. Jesus and the alchemy of forgiveness. When Jesus, already crucified, looked at his executioners and said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," he was not showing weakness. He was performing the highest alchemy, the transmutation of pain into liberation. Not for them, but for himself. Because forgiveness is not a gift for the other, but for the one who gives it. Esoteric texts suggest that every time someone hurts us, there is a previous connection, a history we don't remember. This is not a simple coincidence. Every wound is an opportunity to break an old bond or to reinforce it with more resentment. When someone betrays us, when someone humiliates us, when someone takes away what we hold most dear, we have two options: to become slaves to the wound or to transmute it into wisdom. Those who hold a grudge say, "You hurt me, I won't forget." Those who understand say, "I brought this situation upon myself, I release it." This doesn't mean justifying the hurt or allowing injustice. It means recognizing that what isn't let go drags on, that what isn't healed repeats itself. The last act of freedom. In a monastery lost in the mountains, it is said that a wise man, on the verge of death, gathered his disciples and said to them, "I have made many mistakes. I have loved and hurt. I have been loved and hurt. But before I go, I wish only one thing, to let it all go." He closed his eyes and, with his last breath, whispered, "Nothing binds me. I am at peace." They say his body vanished like the smoke from an extinguished candle, that his soul left no trace on the wheel of existence, that he never had to return. Perhaps heaven is not a place, but a state. Perhaps true liberation lies not in what we gain, but in what we let go. And if this is true, then the only question is, how much more do we want to carry? Chapter 11. The Second Coming of Christ as a Collective Awakening. For centuries, humanity has awaited his return. The prophets have spoken of a day when heaven will open and the radiant figure of Christ will descend with power and glory, separating the righteous from the wicked, ending the age of suffering. In the hearts of the faithful, this promise has shone like a flame in the darkness. But what if the prophecy doesn't refer to an external event? What if Christ's second coming is not the arrival of a Savior from the clouds, but the awakening of divinity within every human being? The ancient scriptures are full of clues that have been misinterpreted. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus says, "The kingdom of God will not come with visible signs, nor will they say, 'Here it is,' or 'There it is,' for the kingdom of God is within you." These words have been repeated, but rarely understood. If the kingdom is not an external place, but an internal state, then the second coming of Christ is not a physical return, but a collective activation of the Christ consciousness. The cosmic Christ and the awakening of humanity. In Gnostic teachings, Christ is not just a man, but a universal consciousness. He is not the property of a single religion, nor is he confined to the historical figure of Jesus. He is the principle of light within the soul, the highest state of perception. In the Gospel of Thomas, attributed to Jesus' words, it is said, "When you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, then you will enter the kingdom." The ancient mystics taught that true awakening does not occur in isolation. It is a process that, once initiated in an individual, expands like a flame lit in a dry field. As one consciousness becomes illuminated, its vibration affects the others, like a fire that lights other torches. This concept is not exclusive to esoteric Christianity. In Hinduism, It speaks of the arrival of the Age of Awakening, the transition from Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, to Satya Yuga, the Age of Truth. In Buddhism, the concept of the Bodhisattva implies that those who achieve enlightenment do not use it to escape the world, but to help others remember their true nature. The apocalypse as revelation, not as an end. The word apocalypse has been translated as destruction, but its original meaning is revelation. It is not a final judgment where the heavens fall, but a collective awakening in which the veil of illusion falls away. When Jesus said, "You will be changed in the twinkling of an eye," he was not speaking of a cataclysm, but of a shift in perception. The sages of ancient times knew that humanity is trapped in a deep sleep, an illusory reality, where it believes itself separated from the source. The second coming is not the arrival of an external savior, but the activation of unity consciousness. The teacher who didn't come back on a cloud. A Tibetan tale tells of a monk who eagerly awaited his master's reincarnation. It was said that when the master returned, he would bring wisdom and peace, and all would acknowledge him. Years passed, and the monk grew old without seeing any signs of the return. One day, while meditating on a mountaintop, he had a vision. His master's face was reflected in every human being he encountered. In the gaze of a beggar, in the laughter of a child, in the tears of a mother. At that moment, he understood. The master would not return in physical form, because he had never left. He had been present throughout everything, waiting for the disciple to open his eyes. The new humanity. If Christ's second coming is a collective awakening, then the key is not to look to the sky, but to look within. It is not to wait for an external miracle, but to become the miracle. An Essene manuscript found in the Qumran caves said, "When humanity remembers its origin, the Son of Man will manifest himself in every heart. Then heaven and earth will no longer be separated, and there will be no more waiting." Perhaps Christ never left. Perhaps he has always been here, embodied in every act of compassion, in every silent awakening, in every soul that remembers its true light. And if this is true, the only question that matters is, when will we open our eyes? Chapter 12. The Secrets of the Last Supper. Bread, Wine, and Spiritual Energy. In a room lit by oil lamps, the Master broke the bread and raised the cup. His disciples surrounded him, unable to grasp the depth of the moment. They believed it was a farewell meal, but in reality, it was a transmission of energy, a pact sealed in ancestral symbols. The Last Supper was not a simple banquet, but a ritual of transmutation. Each element present contained a deeper meaning, a key that the initiates could decipher. It was not just bread and wine. It was matter and spirit, body and consciousness, the visible and the invisible intertwined in a single sacred act. Bread, the substance of creation. "This is my body, which will be given up for you." Bread has been, since ancient times, the symbol of the primordial substance. In Egypt, it was offered to the gods as the food of life. In the Eleusinian mysteries, sacred bread was consumed by initiates before receiving the vision of the eternal. For the Hebrews, manna descended from heaven to nourish the children of Israel in the desert. But Jesus did not speak of bread as mere material sustenance. He spoke of the essence of existence, of the substance that shapes all things. When he said, "This is my body," he was not referring only to his flesh, but to the universal principle that united him to the universe. The alchemists understood this well. In their treatises, they described a raw material underlying all creation, an energy that can be refined to its purest state. The bread Jesus offered was not just wheat and water, but the symbol of transformed consciousness, of the subtle body born when matter has been purified. Wine, the spirit that transforms. "This is my blood, shed for you." Wine has always been the liquid of transfiguration. In Dionysian rituals, It was drunk to abandon the ordinary world and enter states of divine ecstasy. In Kabbalah, wine represents the energy that flows from the higher worlds into human existence. But at the Last Supper, Jesus didn't speak of wine as a simple beverage. He spoke of the inner fire, the divine spark that dwells within every being. His blood was not only his lineage, but the vital energy that circulates in all creation. The mystics understood that when someone consciously drinks from the sacred wine, they are absorbing more than just liquid. They are accepting transformation, allowing spiritual energy to purify their insides and elevate their consciousness. In Gnostic texts, Jesus is said to have whispered to his disciples, "If you drink from my cup, you will drink from hidden knowledge. If you eat from my bread, you will never know death." Because true nourishment is not physical, but vibrational. The ritual of energy transmission. What happened at the Last Supper was more than a meeting. It was a transmission of spiritual codes, an act in which the energy of Christ was imprinted on those who were ready to receive it. The great masters of history have performed similar rituals. In Hinduism, prasad is food blessed by a sage, and whoever consumes it is said to absorb the master's vibration. In Sufism, the dervish receives the spiritual guide's encouragement like a breath of enlightenment. Jesus wasn't just sharing a meal. He was programming his disciples' consciousness for awakening. The bread was the structure, the form. The wine was the movement, the essence. Both were necessary to complete the alchemy of the soul, the hidden legacy. After supper, the disciples weren't the same. Something inside them had changed, even if they didn't fully understand it. The Master's energy had been imprinted on them. Stories tell us that, years after Jesus' ascension, when his followers met in secret, they repeated the same gesture, breaking bread and sharing wine, not as a simple reminder, but as a way to reactivate their connection with the light. Those who knew understood that it wasn't a symbolic act. It was a bridge between the human and the divine. The silence after the last sip. In a lost monastery, an ancient parchment contained a mysterious inscription. When bread is pure, it becomes light. When wine is understood, it becomes fire. Whoever unites the two ceases to be asleep. Perhaps the Last Supper never ended. Perhaps it continues to happen in every awakening soul. And the only question that remains is, are we ready to drink? Chapter 13. Prayer, Meditation, and Connection with the Source. Silence is the language of the soul. In the noise of the world, in the storm of thoughts that covers the mind like a thick veil, man has forgotten how to listen. He believes that prayer is speaking, and that meditation is emptying oneself. But the truth is deeper. Both are doors to the source, different paths that lead to the same destination. Since time immemorial, seekers have understood that divinity is not found outside, but in the depths of one's being. Jesus said it clearly, "When you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen." This teaching refers not only to a physical place, but to inner retreat, to the return to the sanctuary, where the voice of the Spirit has never ceased to speak. The Essenes meditated at dawn, facing the rising sun, for they knew that external light is only a reflection of the internal light. The desert monks sought incessant prayer, a state where each breath became a dialogue with God. The Sufi mystics twirled in trance, losing themselves in the dance of existence, until they disappeared into the divine presence. But what is prayer and what is meditation? The sentence, the vibration of the verb. Prayer is not a plea, but an affirmation. It is not an act of lack, but of communion. When Jesus taught us to pray, he didn't say, "Lord, give us what we lack," but rather, "Thy will be done." For he knew that divine will is perfect harmony, the flow of the universe at its highest expression. The ancient masters knew the power of the spoken word. In the Hebrew tradition, the name of God was unpronounceable because it was not a name, but a vibration. In Hinduism, the sound Om is the primordial echo, the energy that sustains all things. In the Gnostic Gospels, Jesus says, "Ask without fear, and it will be given to you. Speak with certainty, and it will be revealed." Prayer is not repeating mechanical phrases. It is decreeing with conviction, speaking from the Spirit, knowing that the Word is the tool with which man shapes reality. A Sufi master once said, "The best prayer is not the one spoken with the lips, but the one that becomes every beat of the heart." Meditation, merging with the source. If prayer is speaking to God, meditation is listening to His answer, not in words, but in the vibration that lies behind everything. Early Christians practiced hesychia, the search for inner silence. In India, the rishis sat in deep contemplation, stripping their minds of all distractions until they became one with existence. In Taoist tradition, it is said that whoever learns to empty themselves becomes a reflection of the universe itself, the new humanity. If Christ's second coming is a collective awakening, then the key is not to look to the sky, but to look within. It is not to wait for an external miracle, but to become the miracle. An Essene manuscript found in the Qumran caves said, "When humanity remembers its origin, the Son of Man will manifest himself in every heart. Then heaven and earth will no longer be separated, and there will be no more waiting." Perhaps Christ never left. Perhaps He has always been here, embodied in every act of compassion, in every silent awakening, in every soul that remembers its true light. And if this is true, the only question that matters is, when will we open our eyes? Chapter 12. The Secrets of the Last Supper, Bread, Wine, and Spiritual Energy. In a room lit by oil lamps, the Master broke the bread and raised the cup. His disciples surrounded Him, unable to grasp the depth of the moment. They believed it was a farewell supper, but in reality, it was a transmission of energy, a pact sealed in ancestral symbols. The Last Supper was not a simple banquet, but a ritual of transmutation. Each element present contained a deeper meaning, a key that the initiates could decipher. It was not just bread and wine, it was matter and spirit, body and consciousness, the visible and the invisible intertwined in a single sacred act. Bread, the substance of creation. This is my body, which will be given up for you. Bread has been, since ancient times, the symbol of the primordial substance. In Egypt, it was offered to the gods as the food of life. In the Eleusinian mysteries, sacred bread was consumed by initiates before receiving the vision of the eternal. For the Hebrews, manna descended from heaven to nourish the children of Israel in the desert. But Jesus did not speak of bread as mere material sustenance. He spoke of the essence of existence, of the substance that shapes all things. When He said, "This is my body," He was not referring only to His flesh, but to the universal principle that united Him to the universe. The alchemists understood this well. In their treatises, they described a raw material underlying all creation, an energy that can be refined to its purest state. The bread Jesus offered was not just wheat and water, but the symbol of transformed consciousness, of the subtle body born when matter has been purified. Wine, the spirit that transforms. This is my blood, shed for you. Wine has always been the liquid of transfiguration. In Dionysian rituals, it was drunk to abandon the ordinary world and enter states of divine ecstasy. In Kabbalah, wine represents the energy that flows from the higher worlds into human existence. But at the Last Supper, Jesus didn't speak of wine as a simple beverage. He spoke of the inner fire, the divine spark that dwells within every being. His blood was not only His lineage, but the vital energy that circulates in all creation. The mystics understood that when someone consciously drinks from the sacred wine, they are absorbing more than just liquid. They are accepting transformation, allowing spiritual energy to purify their insides and elevate their consciousness. In Gnostic texts, Jesus is said to have whispered to his disciples, "If you drink from my cup, you will drink from hidden knowledge. If you eat from my bread, you will never know death." Because true nourishment is not physical, but vibrational. The ritual of energy transmission. What happened at the Last Supper was more than a meeting. It was a transmission of spiritual codes, an act in which the energy of Christ was imprinted on those who were ready to receive it. The great masters of history have performed similar rituals. In Hinduism, prasad is food blessed by a sage, and whoever consumes it is said to absorb the master's vibration. In Sufism, the dervish receives the spiritual guide's encouragement like a breath of enlightenment. Jesus wasn't just sharing a meal. He was programming his disciples' consciousness for awakening. The bread was the structure, the form. The wine was the movement, the essence. Both were necessary to complete the alchemy of the soul, the hidden legacy. After supper, the disciples weren't the same. Something inside them had changed, even if they didn't fully understand it. The Master's energy had been imprinted on them. Stories tell us that years after Jesus' ascension, when his followers met in secret, they repeated the same gesture, breaking bread and sharing wine, not as a simple reminder, but as a way to reactivate their connection with the light. Those who knew understood that it wasn't a symbolic act. It was a bridge between the human and the divine. The silence after the last sip. In a lost monastery, an ancient parchment contained a mysterious inscription. When bread is pure, it becomes light. When wine is understood, it becomes fire. Whoever unites the two ceases to be asleep. Perhaps the Last Supper never ended. Perhaps it continues to happen in every awakening soul. And the only question that remains is, are we ready to drink? Chapter 13. Prayer, meditation, and connection to Source. Silence is the language of the soul. In the noise of the world, in the storm of thoughts that covers the mind like a thick veil, man has forgotten how to listen. He believes that prayer is speaking and meditation is emptying, but the truth is deeper. Both are doors to the source, different paths that lead to the same destination. Since time immemorial, seekers have understood that divinity is not found on the outside, but within the depths of being. Jesus said it clearly, "When you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen." This teaching refers not only to a physical place, but to an inner retreat, a return to the sanctuary where the voice of the Spirit has never ceased to speak. The Essenes meditated at dawn, facing the rising sun, for they knew that external light is only a reflection of the internal light. The desert monks sought incessant prayer, a state where each breath became a dialogue with God. The Sufi mystics twirled in trance, losing themselves in the dance of existence, until they disappeared into the divine presence. But what is prayer, and what is meditation? The sentence, the vibration of the verb. Prayer is not a plea, but an affirmation. It is not an act of lack, but of communion. When Jesus taught us to pray, he didn't say, "Lord, give us what we lack," but rather, "Thy will be done." For he knew that divine will is perfect harmony, the flow of the universe at its highest expression. The ancient masters knew the power of the spoken word. In the Hebrew tradition, the name of God was unpronounceable because it was not a name, but a vibration. In Hinduism, the sound Om is the primordial echo, the energy that sustains all things. In the Gnostic Gospels, Jesus says, "Ask without fear, and it will be given to you. Speak with certainty, and it will be revealed." Prayer is not repeating mechanical phrases. It is decreeing with conviction, speaking from the Spirit, knowing that the Word is the tool with which man shapes reality. A Sufi master once said, "The best prayer is not the one spoken with the lips, but the one that becomes every beat of the heart. Meditation, merging with the source. If prayer is speaking to God, meditation is listening to His answer, not in words, but in the vibration that lies behind everything. Early Christians practiced hesychia, the search for inner silence. In India, the rishis sat in deep contemplation, stripping their minds of all distractions until they became one with existence. In Taoist tradition, it is said that whoever learns to empty themselves becomes a reflection of the universe itself. Jesus didn't just pray, He also went into the desert, removed Himself from the crowd, and spent entire nights in communion with the invisible. Because connection with the source is not an event, but a state. In the monasteries of Tibet, it is said that there is a mountain where the wind does not blow. There, in the deepest silence, monks have heard what words cannot express: the union of the two, the open door. Prayer and meditation are not opposites, but complementary. One is the impulse that elevates, the other is the space that receives. When the two unite, the bridge between the human and the divine is created. The ancients knew that the secret lies in breathing. To inhale is to receive. To exhale is to offer. With each breath, consciousness enters and exits the mystery, remembering, if only for an instant, its true nature. An old scroll found on Mount Athos bore an enigmatic inscription: "Pray as if you had already received. Meditate as if you had never asked. Then the door will open itself." Perhaps the search was never outward. Perhaps the source was never far away. And the only question that remains is, who is willing to enter? Chapter 14. The Awakening of Christ in the New World. The rising sun casts its light upon a different horizon. The world we once knew is changing, and with it, the consciousness of those who inhabit it. Old structures, unshakable dogmas, and imposed truths are beginning to crumble. Something new is emerging, not from without, but from the depths of the collective soul. The Christ is awakening, not as a distant figure returning from the heavens, but as a living spark within every human being. It is not the return of one man, but the manifestation of a consciousness that has always been present, awaiting the moment when the veils of illusion would fall away. The inner Christ, beyond history. The ancient sages taught that Christ is not merely an individual, but an eternal principle, a force that lies dormant at the core of being. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, "The kingdom is within you and without you. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are children of the living Father." The words have been there from the beginning, but man has preferred to wait for a Redeemer rather than awaken the Christ within. He has sought outside what can only be done from within. In the Essene monasteries, initiates received a hidden message. Christ is not the name of a man, but the flame that burns in all who remember. Now, in this new world, the flame is being rekindled, the end of one era and the birth of another. The scriptures have spoken of the end of time, not as a destruction of the world, but as the dissolution of the old consciousness. The era of fear, of separation, of the enslavement of the soul to material things is coming to an end. The signs are everywhere. The system that dominated the human mind is fragmenting. The paradigms that governed existence are losing their power. The truth that was hidden begins to come to light. The apocalypse was never the end, but the revelation. And in the midst of this chaos, Christ awakens in hearts that no longer fear, in minds that understand that divinity was never outside. The Christ of the New World, a unified consciousness. In the Vedic tradition, there is talk of the advent of a new cycle, where humankind will cease to see itself as an isolated entity and will recognize its unity with all that exists. In Buddhism, Maitreya, the Buddha of the future, will not be a single enlightened being, but all of humanity attaining enlightenment. Jesus spoke of the vine and the branches. I am the vine, you are the branches. Abide in me, and I in you. This is not the message of a Messiah seeking followers, but of a consciousness seeking to awaken in every soul. When Christ fully awakens within humanity, differences of creed, race, and nation will become meaningless. It will be understood that the divine does not belong to one people or one faith, but is the essence of all that is. The man who dreamed of the living Christ. The Sufis tell of a man who spent his entire life waiting for the arrival of the Savior. He refused to live fully. For each day, he woke up hoping that the great Master would descend from the heavens and change the world with his power. One night, in a dream, he saw a light that blinded him, and in that light, a voice spoke to him. "Why do you keep waiting?" The man, trembling, replied, "Because they promised that the Redeemer would come." The voice smiled inside his mind. "Look at yourself in the water." The man bent over a crystal lake and saw his own reflection, but he was no longer the same. His eyes shone with a golden light. His skin radiated a radiance he had never seen before. And then he woke up, and he never waited again. The awakening that has already begun. Christ will not come in the clouds. He will not return with heavenly armies or fiery trumpets. He is being born in every being who remembers their origin, in the child who looks at the world with wonder, in the woman who understands that there are no boundaries between her soul and that of another, in the man who leaves his fear behind and walks with certainty in the light. The second coming is not an event. It is a collective awakening. And the only question that remains is, have you opened your eyes yet? Exercise. The gaze of Christ. This exercise is simple, but if you practice it with true intention, it will transform your perception of reality. You don't need a special place or tools. You just need your awareness and your eyes. Instructions. First, choose an everyday place. It could be church, your workplace, the street, public transportation, or even your home. It doesn't matter where you are. What matters is how you look. Second, relax and breathe. Before you begin, close your eyes for a moment and take 3 deep breaths. With each inhalation, feel yourself filling with presence. With each exhalation, let go of distraction and routine. Third, activate the gaze of Christ. Now open your eyes with the intention of seeing through divinity. Not as the person you've always looked, but as if the Christ within you were awakening in this instant. Imagine that in every face you see as God in disguise. See people as if they were sacred, even those who make you uncomfortable or indifferent. Observe objects, buildings, trees, as if they all lived with the same divine essence. If you speak to someone, listen as if they were Jesus speaking to you in secret, testing your ability to recognize him. Fourth, observe what changes in you. Do you feel more compassion? Do you notice anything different about people or the environment? Do you perceive a peace that wasn't there before? Fifth, carry out this practice during the day. You don't have to do it all the time, but repeat it at specific times. When you're walking, when you're having a conversation, when you see something you'd normally ignore. The secret of this exercise: Christ has never been absent. It's just that the world has covered him with a layer of separation, judgment, and forgetfulness. This exercise restores the vision that has always been there, but which the mind has clouded. In the Gnostic Gospels, Jesus says, "Split a piece of wood, and I will be there. Lift a stone, and you will find me." Christ is everywhere. The question is, do you dare to see him